The date is January 11th, 2016, and Alabama is facing off against Clemson in the national championship game. Alabama is about to try onside kick in the fourth quarter to take full momentum in this ball game and try to regain the lead.
Stewart, the key play, and now an onside kick. And it's caught, and Alabama's got the ball back.
This is one of the most memorable plays from this national championship game, but there were more memorable plays during the whole college football season. But to see those, we gotta take a look at what college football looked like 10 years ago. Let's start by taking a look at some of the key coaching hires during the offseason. The big headliner was Jim Harbaugh leaving his NFL job coaching the 49ers to go to his alma mater and coach Michigan. Nebraska would fire Bo Pelini, who was the head coach of 8 years, to hire Mike Riley, who was Oregon State's former head coach. And Narduzzi got hired by Pitt, Paul Chryst got hired by Wisconsin, and then we saw Lance Leopold get hired by Buffalo. Now we move on to conference realignment, where there wasn't much of it. We saw Charlotte move up from the FCS to the FBS to Conference USA. Then we saw Navy move from independent to the American Conference. And then after that, we saw UAB go from Conference USA to no longer having a college football program. Although due to a few public outcries and some fundraising efforts, we saw UAB announce 6 months later that they were going to reinstate the college football program, but it will be back in 2017. Taking a look at the incoming freshmen for this season, the top 10 wasn't all that. I actually made a video about it. It was headlined by Derwin James. But outside the top 10, we still had some really good players. You had Calvin Ridley, Micah Fitzpatrick, Roquan Smith, and Saquon Barkley. Alabama had the #1 recruiting class coming into this season. Transferring to a different school is such a big thing in today's era of college football, but 10 years ago it wasn't as common. But you still have some key players like Baker Mayfield, Vernon Adams Jr., Everett Golson, and Jordan Howard into the portal. I almost forgot that Kenny Golladay also was a transfer, as he went from North Dakota to Northern Illinois. Now let's take a look at some preseason Heisman favorites. You had Trevon Boykin from TCU, Ezekiel Elliott from Ohio State, somewhat JT Barrett. I don't think he was that much of a favorite. Tell me if y'all remember, Jeremy Johnson. I remember him getting crazy Heisman hype going into this season. Then you had names that was getting a little bit less hype like Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, and Dak Prescott. Taking a look at some returning players, you had Deshaun Watson, who was going to his second season at Clemson, Leonard Fournette, who was due for a breakout season, Joey Bosa, who was also due for a breakout defensive season, Jalen Ramsey, who was one of the best DBs in college football, and Myles Garrett, who was one of the best pass rushers in college football. And yeah, I know you also had guys like Derrick Henry, Connor Cook, and Christian McCaffrey also returning. Now let's look at some key storylines. For starter, you had the Ohio State quarterback battle between Cardale Jones and JT Barrett. Cardale Jones won them a national title, but JT Barrett led them throughout that whole season up until his injury. Could Alabama make the national title, as we haven't seen them in the national title game in 2 seasons? Could Clemson make a college football playoff push, as they were getting much hype going into the season? Also, could TCU bounce back from getting snubbed last season and make the college football playoffs? The preseason AP Top 5 teams was much different from today's preseason AP Top 5 teams. 10 years ago, you had Ohio State at 1, TCU at 2, Alabama at 3, Baylor at 4, and Michigan State at 5. Jumping into the season, in week 1, nothing too crazy happened. TCU survived the scare, Boise State survived the scare, and we saw a guy named Lamar Jackson make his college football debut. Also, Ohio State played Virginia Tech, and this was the game where Braxton Miller had that crazy spin move. Also, JT Barrett outperformed Cardale Jones, so right now he was leading for that starting quarterback position. BYU would beat Nebraska on a crazy Hail Mary play, and I actually remember watching this play live. In week 2, we saw the first top 10 matchup of the season between Michigan State and Oregon, where Michigan State would beat them after stopping Oregon on 4th down with just over 1 minute left to go in the game. We saw another top 25 matchup between Oklahoma and Tennessee, where Oklahoma will win 31-24 after Tennessee would throw a pick to end the game. After struggling against Louisville in week 1, it looked like Auburn's season was going to continue to go downhill pretty soon, as they would struggle against Jacksonville State when they beat them in overtime 27-20. And after those first 2 weeks, Jeremy Johnson Heisman case was thrown out the window. Week 3, we saw the first upset of the college football season. Number 15 Ole Miss would beat number 2 Alabama 43-37. After the loss, Alabama dropped to number 12 in the ranking, and it took them 6 weeks to get back in the top 4. We saw Missouri have a weird, almost upsetting game against UConn as they beat them 9-6. We saw another upset where number 6 USC would lose to an unranked Stanford team at the time, 41-31. Not too much happened in week 4. We saw TCU, who was ranked number 3, almost lose to Texas Tech as they beat them in a crazy shootout 55-52. Florida State would beat Tennessee after Tennessee missed a game-winning field goal. And after this week, Leonard Fournette was probably leading the Heisman race, as he already had 600 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns in just 3 games. The slate for October 3rd was supposed to be a good one, as we had Alabama versus Georgia, which was a top 25 matchup, but Alabama would end up blowing out Georgia. We saw Clemson technically upset Notre Dame after they stopped them on a 2-point conversion with a couple seconds left to go in the fourth quarter. The next week, we saw TCU survive another scare as they beat Kansas State 52-45. At this time, TCU was ranked number 2 and Baylor was ranked number 3, but Baylor low-key looked like the better team. Leonard Fournette was still leading Heisman talks, as after this week he had over 1,000 yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. The very next week against number 8 ranked Florida, he would rush for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns, strengthening his case again. In the Michigan versus Michigan State game, we seen one of the craziest endings as Michigan botched a punt and Michigan State picked it up and returned it for a touchdown for the win. The top 25 after this week was setting us up for really good games later on in the season, as we had TCU versus Baylor, who were both ranked in the top 10, who were going to face each other later on. Then you also had Michigan State and Ohio State, who were ranked in the top 10, facing each other later on in the season. The biggest thing that happened in week 8 was Georgia Tech blocking a Florida State field goal and returning for a touchdown and the win in the final seconds. Utah would start the week ranked number 3, but they would not end the week ranked number 3 as they lost to USC. After this, we saw Duke creep up in the top 20, but that wouldn't last long because the following week they lost to Miami on a crazy lateral kickoff touchdown. Leonard Fournette and LSU was set to face off against Alabama, and this was a crazy hype game because Leonard Fournette was still leading in Heisman talks. But his case for the Heisman would quickly end as he had 31 yards, LSU would lose, and Derrick Henry outperformed him and pushed his name up in Heisman talks. This was the same week where the Arkansas versus Ole Miss game happened, where Arkansas put off like a 4th and 26 crazy play, and if I'm not mistaken, they would end up winning that game. Nebraska will upset Michigan State, but Michigan State was still being college football playoff talks. We also saw TCU lose to Oklahoma State, and this basically knocked them out of the college football playoff talks as well. The next week was highlighted by Oregon versus Stanford, where Oregon beat Stanford 38-36, knocking them out of the college football playoff race. A week after TCU losing, we also saw Baylor drop a game to Oklahoma. Jumping over to rivalry week, we saw Baylor versus TCU finally, and TCU beat them, ending any hopes of Baylor going to the playoffs. Stanford would beat number 4 Notre Dame, ending their college football playoff hopes as well. During championship week, we saw number 5 Michigan State beat number 4 Iowa, punching their ticket to the college football playoffs, and Clemson and Alabama both punched their tickets as well. There wasn't much controversy for that 4th spot, as Oklahoma won the week before against Oklahoma State, and they didn't have no Big 12 championship game at the time. So the college football playoffs were now set. In the Orange Bowl, we had Clemson versus Oklahoma, and in the Cotton Bowl, we had Michigan State versus Alabama. And Alabama will be walking into that game with the Heisman Trophy winner, as it was awarded to Derrick Henry at the end of the season, even though some people believe that Christian McCaffrey should have won that award. And then the semifinal games, we saw Alabama blow out Michigan State 30-0. It's easy to forget in the Orange Bowl, Oklahoma was up on Clemson 17-16 at halftime, but then in the second half, Clemson scored 21 unanswered points. In the national championship game between Alabama and Clemson, we saw both teams go back and forth through the first 3 quarters. But early in the fourth quarter, when it was tied 24-24, is when Alabama attempted that onside kick and recovered it. That play would change things. Alabama got the ball back, scored a touchdown, but Clemson would respond with a field goal. But right after the field goal, we saw Kenyon Drake return a kickoff for a touchdown and put Alabama up by 11. That play basically in the game, both teams went on to trade touchdowns, and Alabama will win 45-40. So as we can see, this season was filled with some great moments, some good moments, and some moments that you just won't remember. And even though it wasn't the craziest season, it was still a really good season that some will remember forever. But that'll be all for this video. Let me know what video y'all want next, and until next time, I'm out. Peace.